Hello everyone and welcome to my film. You're probably wondering, this guy's film looks different to the last one he showed us. Yes, there is a difference. For I am using Garry's mod instead of paint this time around. Now, on to business. Now just a word of warning to any sports fans watching, what I'm about to say is considered heresy to the believer's ears. So I say leave. Or find a bucket, put it on your head and keep hitting it until you hear white noise. Or, after lectures, go to a shop, find some rope, a lovely tree, and hang me up like the Christmas fairy. So, what do I think to all this football malarkey? Well, if players fouling, acting as if they lost a toe and still get away with it, ridiculous amount of money a footballer gets for kicking an inflated pig's bladder all day, where it can be spent elsewhere and given to the people who really need it, the nationalism that spawns around footballers like a bad smell and results in hooligan violence. Well, at least it hasn't caused any conflict on the national scale, most people would say. That is before I scream NO! With the look of smugness on my face. Yes, football did cause a war actually. The Football War of 1969 between El Salvador and Honduras to be exact. Enjoy. Alright, I have to correct myself. Even though the name of the conflict implies that a sport was responsible for the war to start in the first place, it was in fact several other factors that caused it, notably land reforms, immigration, and rich trying to stay rich. Let me explain. 30 years previously to the war, many Salvadorans had begun migrating towards their larger neighbour Honduras, mainly so to gain access to land and for work opportunities that Honduras provided. By 1969, however, up to 300,000 Salvadorians have migrated to Honduras. Most land in Honduras at this point was owned by the United Fruit Company. The bloody Fruit Company! But as this was threatened, by 1966, the rich and UFC, not Ultimate Fighter Championships by the way, banded together and formed the National Federation of Farmers and Livestock Farmers of Honduras, or FENA. This was approved by Honduras' president and dictator Osvaldo Lopez Arellano. A year later, this was enforced. This allowed the government to evict Salvadorian peasants and give back the land to the Hondurans. Wow, I thought, these are the sort of policies that would make Nigel Farage blush. Anyways, as the years went on, tensions between the two countries reached boiling point, and it began to spill out of control during the football qualifying rounds for the 1970 World Cup, hence the conflict's name. On June 8, 1969, after a 1-0 victory with Honduras over El Salvador, there was fights between the crowd and Honduras' capital. During the second match on the 15th of June, in El Salvador's capital, San Salvador, surprise, there was more violence when El Salvador won a 3-0 victory over Honduras. The third match, they played on neutral ground in Mexico City. The match ended in a 3-2 victory for El Salvador. Also on that day, El Salvador severed all diplomatic relations with Honduras over the country's treatment of El Salvadorian migrants. Border skirmishes between the two nations became commonplace before the formal declaration of war on the 14th of July 1969. However, due to a US arms embargo, El Salvador had to go to lengths to obtain military equipment. Most notable was the mass purchase of vintage World War II aircraft from private owners. Because of this, the Football War would be the last war to use piston-engined aircraft en masse against each other. This not only applied to El Salvador, but also Honduras, making both nations equally matched. On the afternoon of July 14th, the Salvadorian Air Force, using converted airliners as bombers, began conducting raids within Honduras. This caught the slightly better equipped Honduran Air Force completely off guard, bogged down the Air Force for the day. Later the Salvadorian Army, consisting of 21,000 soldiers under the command of the president himself, Fidel Sanchez Hernandez, raided Honduras from the main road between the two nations. The Honduran army, defending their country, only consisted of 13,200 soldiers, and it too was commanded by the Honduran president, Osvaldo Lopez Arellano. On 15th of July, the situation was grim for the Honduran military. They fell back 8 kilometers from their defensive positions, and to make things worse for them, the Salvadorians captured Nueva Octopega near the border, along with 8 other cities. This put the Salvadorians within striking distance of the Honduran capital. However, the Salvadorian advance was checked due to Honduran airstrikes at oil depots and the Salvadorian airfield of Villapampango. This pretty much severed the Salvadorian supply line, and also allowed the Honduras to achieve absolute air superiority. A tactical nightmare for a modern general. On the same day, the Organization of American States met and demanded a ceasefire and also for El Salvador to withdraw from Honduras. This was refused, as the Salvadorians demanded repatriations for the Salvadorians misplaced during the fighting and to ensure the safety for those in Honduras. Fearing a Salvadorian attack on the capital, the Honduras demanded the ceasefire be taken. Eventually, the Salvadorians finally agreed with it. It was warranted the 18th of July and fully put into effect on the 20th. By August 2nd, the Salvadorians withdrew from Honduras entirely. The war ended after only 3 days of fighting. The consequences for such a brief conflict is quite astounding, and sometimes quite severe. Casualties between the combatant nations were quite small. El Salvador lost 900 soldiers, whereas Honduras lost 2,100 soldiers, alongside 2,000 civilians. Trade between the two nations was disrupted. The Central American Common Market, the US ideal to stop the influence of the Cuban Revolution, was suspended for 22 years. In both Honduras and El Salvador, political power for the two dictators was reinforced. Although elections were allowed in both states, they were largely fraudulent. And finally, the situation in El Salvador worsened. Masses of deported Salvadorians returned to an already overpopulated country. The government failed to improve the social conditions for its civilians. This being seen as a fault for the failing government, citizens went to arms and plunged the country into a brutal civil war, which would last from 1979 to 1992. If there is one word to formalize that situation and to end this presentation, it would be this. Irony!